Hello, fight fans. Welcome back to my channel. I am, of course, Jess, the MMA Girl, your host of the MMA Girl podcast. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to all the platforms that you're listening to me on. And thank you very much for being here. Today, we're here for episode 34 of the MMA Girl podcast. And we have a lot of stuff to discuss. I'm, of course, going to go into Ronda Rousey coming back to MMA finally. And she'll be taking on Gina Carano for a super fight, 5-round super fight on Netflix, hosted by, of course, MVP Productions, which is, of course, Jake Paul's fighting promotion. Now, of course, this has stirred up a lot of controversy, a lot of stories, a lot of arguments between Dana White, the UFC, Ronda Rousey, and Gina, of course, are surfacing right now. So there's a lot to unpack around this situation. But, of course, the most important thing to know is that Ronda Rousey is going to be back for a unprecedented event. MVP are doing their first MMA event with this as their main event, as far as we know. Other things, of course, we're going to be discussing in this podcast are, of course, the news surrounding the Whitehouse card. Conor McGregor has apparently officially said yes, so he's waiting for the rest of his contract to be negotiated and written up. Okay, let's get into the first story, of course, the most important part of this podcast, Ronda Rousey's unprecedented return to the octagon. Of course, it won't be a UFC octagon. It will be an MVP octagon, run, of course, by Jake Paul's promotion, his boxing promotion originally, but now they're going into MMA. Now, this is something that was supposed to happen quite some time ago, getting into MMA. Even Jake Paul himself signed to PFL because he wanted to go into MMA, but he may one day choose to go into MMA in his own promotion, or so be it. He never will. But the most important part of this for us is that Ronda Rousey is back. Even though it's not the UFC, she's going to be back for probably one of the most unprecedented, anticipated fights in women's MMA history. Of course, she will be taking on Gina Carano, not an unfamiliar face to us fight fans, and of course, someone who was supposed to fight Ronda Rousey back in the day. Gina Carano was saying that she was having meetings with Dana White in 2015, 2016 for a comeback fight against Ronda Rousey. She was proposed $1 million to get in an octagon and fight Ronda Rousey, but unfortunately asking for a few too many months off to train and get back into her fighting lifestyle as she was transferred to Hollywood. She was a Hollywood actress at the time. She asked Dana White for some time to get back into training, to find a team, find a gym, and Dana White did not like that. So, of course, all bets were off, all negotiations were halted, and this super fight never took place. Now, of course, we know from Ronda Rousey's perspective, however, that the UFC have offered her a few times to come back to the octagon, but having had children, having had stints with WWE, having had more money proposed to her elsewhere, she's not come back to the UFC yet. And I think signing with MVP is going to mark her end of the UFC potentially ever calling her back, because now that she's going into business with Jake Paul, I think that the UFC will, or Dana White at least, will laugh at it and never call Ronda Rousey back. Of course, she's at the end of her career. She was supposed to be retired anyway. Both women, Gina Carano and Ronda Rousey, we didn't think we'd see them back in an octagon, in a cage of MMA. Gina Carano a lot less so than Ronda Rousey, because, of course, Ronda Rousey has been seen to be training some sort of MMA for the past while. And, of course, she made the huge announcement of her comeback fight on her Instagram, on her social medias, saying that I've been so excited to break the news. So, of course, it's been a long time in making this fight. I think there must be big money involved. As soon as I have those numbers, I will let you know. But it's going to be a 5-round featherweight bout. So this is going to be a featherweight bout for women in this huge MMA event for MVP on Netflix. So, of course, MVP are teaming up with Netflix again to bring us something that we can watch worldwide that will generate a lot of revenue for MVP and a lot of revenue for these two women who, of course, are going to be potentially headlining this card. I don't see any other fight that they could possibly make with any former UFC stars or former MMA stars that could top this fight. So this has to be the main event. This has to be the 5-round main event at the end of the night. And it's happening in Los Angeles on May 16th this year. So it's very, very close. We're getting to know this information just now, but of course, it's in a few months. Of course, people are completely shocked. Now, Ronda Rousey, when announcing this fight was going to happen, she made sure to say, we chose to go with, and I quote, a fighter-friendly promotion. Now, this is a little dig at the UFC. We don't really know what's gone on between the UFC and Ronda Rousey, whether there's been a few arguments here and there. We know, of course, she's not come back, so there must be reasons for that. Maybe negotiations just didn't go the way she had wanted them to, or the way the UFC wanted them to. But at least we know that Ronda Rousey is kind of putting a nail in her coffin for the UFC, and she won't probably ever sign with the UFC ever again. This may be her first comeback fight and her last comeback fight. We don't know what the future holds for Ronda Rousey, but let me know in the comments down below if you guys are excited for the comeback of Ronda Rousey and Gina Carano, because not forgetting Gina Carano is coming back too. But of course, Ronda Rousey is the biggest name in women's MMA, and if not one of the biggest names in MMA in general. So her comeback is highly anticipated and everyone is freaking out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Now for the Whitehouse news, for some Whitehouse card updates. Of course, Dana White has announced that he was going into the matchmaking session with, of course, Sean Shelby, Mick Maynard, Hunter Campbell. They were all going to be sitting around a table with other people, of course, to discuss and matchmake for the Whitehouse. Now, since then, we've not had any news at all because he announced that the matchmaking was completed, the matchmaking was done. But will we get to know the fights yet? Of course, that's going to be little by little, we'll know what the fights are going to be. But some notorious one, the notorious one, Conor McGregor, has tweeted officially that he has been offered an opponent and he has said yes to said opponent. The negotiations will have to obviously continue vis-a-vis his pay, his contract, etc. But the most important part is that we can officially confirm, obviously must be taken with a pinch of salt because it's Conor McGregor tweeting it, but we can confirm that Conor McGregor has been offered an opponent and he has accepted that opponent. So the opponent that was offered to him is someone that he's interested in fighting. Will that be Mauricio Rufy? Because of course Mauricio Rufy was rumored to be the last official rumored opponent for Conor McGregor, because of course everything is unfortunately rumors, but we have been hearing through the grapevines that Rufy is someone that the UFC were eyeing up as the potential opponent for a nice, probably 5-rounder against Conor McGregor for his return bout at the Whitehouse. However, there of course were rumors that it would be Jorge Masvidal. Dana White squashed that. Michael Chandler, that was squashed as well. So it may be a new name that we would never have thought of in the history of names in the UFC currently on the active roster, or it may be Mauricio Rufy, who we've been hearing most recently is a targeted potential opponent for Conor McGregor. In any case, I will only be happy when the fight is announced and the UFC will officially say, yes, Conor McGregor has signed on the dotted line and that we have the opponent signed on the dotted line and the fight is official. And I think they'll wait quite some time before announcing Conor's fight because that is the most anticipated fight on the Whitehouse card. Let's not forget that. But let's get into some other news on that front, because of course we know for a fact that Tom Aspinall has just undergone double eye surgery. I'll try and put a photo of him up on the screen right now for those who are watching on YouTube. I don't see how he could be lying about his health situation and his eyes, because of course being on the bench that long, that puts you at risk to have an interim title champion put in place, which will probably happen, or the UFC may even ask you to vacate your title if you're too long on the bench. So this is not something I think that Tom Aspinall wants. So any kind of rumors that he's exaggerating, I don't think that's true. In any case, we won't know until some sort of proof is shown to us. But what we do know is that after having double eye surgery, after having bloodshot eyes coming out of the clinic, he has announced that, of course, he needs at least 6 to 8 months out because this is a long-term recovery needed for this sort of operation. So there will definitely, and I can confirm 100%, there will definitely be an interim title fight for the heavyweight title whilst we're waiting for Tom Aspinall to come off the bench. Now, rumours are swirling around, of course. Is Alex Pereira going to be moving up to fight Cyril Gane? Will Cyril Gane fight someone else like Walter Cortez Acosta? Those are things that we are just speculating because there is no news on that. Alex Pereira, of course, beefing up, looking like he's heading towards heavyweight, but he does beef up between his fights, not considerably, but he does beef up between his fights and he gets to some very high numbers, even though he's a light heavyweight fighter currently. But there were also rumours that at the Whitehouse, we may be getting John Jones versus Alex Pereira at light heavyweight, so at 205. So apparently the UFC and especially Dana White do not want to do the fight between Alex Pereira and John Jones at heavyweight, which is confusing for me because John Jones is currently, or was, on the heavyweight roster most recently. And from what we're hearing and what we're seeing, Alex Pereira looks more like a heavyweight than a light heavyweight at some occasions. But we won't know until, of course, the fights are announced. That is yet again some rumours. But what we do know is that there will definitely 100% be an interim title fight, and it has to be at the Whitehouse because the UFC has announced, of course, that the Whitehouse card will contain only 6 to 7 fights, which will be a lot shorter, but I think because they're going to be title fights, they're all going to be 5-rounders. There may be some non-title fights. For example, Conor's fight will probably not be a title fight, but it will probably be a 5-rounder still. There may be some other fights that aren't title fights that will be 3-rounders, but most of the fights are supposed to be title fights, which will be 5-rounders. So that explains the fact that we don't have as many fights, but the fights will be longer if they don't finish before the last round. So of course, we don't know how this is going to play out, but I think that most of these title fights that need to come to fruition, like for example, Justin Gaethje versus Ilya, that needs to be done at the Whitehouse to unify the lightweight belts. So probably we'll get Ilya versus Justin, Cyril Gane, number one contender for the UFC's heavyweight title. He'll be taking on someone from the heavyweight roster, or Alex Pereira for the interim title belt. And if it's not Alex Pereira against Cyril, then we may be getting another title fight at light heavyweight, probably between Alex Pereira and John Jones. Or it may be a non-title fight and we're getting probably Yuri Prochazka versus Carlos Ulberg for the title that is vacated by Alex Pereira. There are so many possibilities here and so many rumors that we don't know yet what to say is 100% true, but at least we know an interim title fight will be held for the heavyweight belt, that's for sure, and it will most likely happen at the Whitehouse. What do you guys think of the current Whitehouse card rumors? What would you like to be true? What would you like to happen at the Whitehouse? Let me know in the comments down below. Of course, this week is the comeback of the UFC once again. We have UFC Houston happening this weekend between Sean Strickland and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, of course. A big main event in Houston, Texas, and I'm very excited for that card. You'll be getting from me, of course, a picks video. I've done my picks video with a member of the Scrap and Roll podcast, Jace, so you'll be getting that in a couple of days. But in the meantime, let's talk about another MMA promotion, but it's not a normal MMA promotion. It's, of course, Gamebred MMA, and it's bare knuckle, and it's held, of course, and created by none other than Jorge Masvidal, former UFC legend. He has, of course, created his own league of MMA bare knuckle, and it's called Gamebred MMA. And he's coming back with a highly anticipated 500k tournament containing a lot of former UFC heavyweights and light heavyweights. So let me read to you what we know for now about this promotion, about the state of bare knuckle in Gamebred's promotion. So it's going to be a 16-man Gamebred bare knuckle MMA tournament. Just to announce, you guys, Anthony Smith, if you haven't seen on social media, Anthony Smith is coming out of retirement, not even a year after retiring, to go back into MMA, but this time bare knuckle in Gamebred MMA. And this will be happening in Puerto Rico. And the date is the 10th of April, so it's very soon. He'll be taking on Chase Sherman, and both guys, of course, former UFC fighters. Both guys looking to probably embellish their last few fights in their MMA career, if you like to call that MMA, because I don't know whether this even counts on the MMA record, seeing it's bare knuckle. But in any case, we have the return also of Muhammad Usman, who recently was cut by the UFC. Of course, he was tested positive for PEDs, so he was cut by the UFC quite quickly, and he'll be coming in at heavyweight, of course, for Gamebred MMA, bare knuckle as well, and he'll be taking on Guto Innocente. So I'm very excited to see Muhammad Usman getting this chance to come back and show what he's worth, of course, in another promotion. This may be the better promotion for him, because at UFC, even though he is Kamaru Usman's little brother, it doesn't mean he is as good as Kamaru, and of course we saw that he wasn't. So maybe this will be a nice way for him to show his power, to get some dominant victories in his tournament and put himself back on the MMA map, even though it's not at the UFC. And this is what some of these promotions are helping other fighters do, because when you are chucked or cut from the UFC or no longer getting any fights with the UFC and you go to another promotion, this is your chance to show what you're made of and not waste your talent, of course. So Muhammad Usman, good luck to you at Gamebred Bare Knuckle MMA. And I will come back to you guys with some more information on the Gamebred MMA tournament in Puerto Rico, the 10th of April, as soon as I have more information. Of course, as you guys know, a lot of fighters have been cut from the UFC recently, including, of course, Jailton Almeida, who after his fight against Kuniev at the Apex 2 weeks ago, unfortunately, instead of being able to move down to light heavyweight as he announced after that fight, after losing via UD, he was cut from the UFC. So maybe that's someone we'll also be seeing at Gamebred MMA or Bare Knuckle FC, somewhere along those lines. So somewhere we can see his potential maybe come out a bit more, or maybe he'll sign to RAF to do some grappling fights. Who knows? But good luck to all the fighters, of course, who have been cut by the UFC recently. I hope they're all able to be picked up quite quickly by some good promotions, paying them good money to show off their MMA and fighting skills. Let me know in the comments down below if there are any people that were cut from the UFC recently that put a dagger in your heart. And we'll talk about the rest of those fights that are coming up at Gamebred very soon. And I'll let you guys know if I've got any news on the recently cut fighters and what they're doing in the future. For now, of course, I've been Jess, the MMA girl. Thank you very much for staying to the end of this podcast. I wish you all very well. See you in a couple of days for my UFC Houston breakdown and picks for the main card of that brilliant card that's happening this Saturday. And until then, have a nice fight week. Bye.